Wait a minute. Correct me if I'm wrong here because I am incredibly confused this morning. I know ESPN is proud to be called the worldwide leader in woke, but I also thought ESPN was the proud home of women's sports. ESPN is the home of feminism. They are the proud home of independent women. All my women independent, why are you so unhappy? Every summer, ESPN boasts about being the proud home of the WNBA. We are proud to be the home of pretend basketball. Join us on ESPN for an exciting matchup between the bearded beauties and the masculine moodies. For decades, ESPN has hosted the women's tournament in college basketball. Over the last couple of years, they've even mistakenly referred to it as March Madness. Recently, ESPN gave a national platform to the women's volleyball tournament, which, by the way, that shit was absolutely amazing. Sunday afternoon on ABC, the young women from Louisville and Penn State, they put on a show. I was paying more attention to women's college volleyball Sunday than I was to the NFL. I damn sure wasn't paying attention to the NFL last night. What the hell were they doing putting the Saints on national television in prime time? Who is coming up with the schedule for these nationally televised games? Well, KC, they couldn't have known back in the spring that the Saints would be devastated by injury. Injuries? Injuries. You sound like Mickey Loomis. Injuries are not the reason that the Saints suck. The NFL knew back in the spring that Donnie Carr was the starting quarterback. They knew that Denise Allen was the head coach. They knew by the time we got to December, there was a good chance that the Saints would be playing for draft position instead of playoff position. So why would you present that polished turd to a national audience last night? Anyway, you get the point. Supposedly, ESPN is the proud home of women's sports. Key word, supposedly. Because the truth is, ESPN boasting about being the proud home of women's sports, that is an illusion. This week, the hypocrisy of ESPN was exposed again. As it turns out, ESPN is the proud home of women's sports, but only when the women competing in sports were born with a supersized cucumber. Make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at KC_BTL84. Link to the second channel in the description below. This morning on the second channel, we talked about Stephen A. Smith living with regret. Over the weekend, Stevie admitted that he regrets voting for cackling Cam Harris. He also claimed that he would vote for Donnie Trump if Trump was allowed to run for a third term. I gave my theory as to why we are seeing this sudden shift with Stephen A. Smith. So head over to the second channel and check it out. Also, second annual Huge Embarrassing Failure Awards going to be available on New Year's Eve. Last year, our former fearless leader Johnny B. Biden won in a landslide. This year, it was a tightly contested race to see who would take home the prestigious crown of the biggest huge embarrassing failure of 2024. The winner literally came down to a handful of votes. Going to be working on the video this weekend. It's going to be available on New Year's Eve. How many of you guys have heard of Katie Barnes? Anyone? No one's heard of Katie Barnes. All right, well, allow me to introduce you to Katie. According to the bio on her website, as a non-binary person of color, Katie is committed to using their voice, visibility, and platforms to bring attention to the issues that marginalized people face. What? There? I thought we were talking about Katie, one person. I thought there would imply that we're talking about two people or a group of people, right? As I continued reading her bio, it started to make a little more sense because Katie Barnes prefers they them pronouns, which provides clarity on them's use of their. Are you still following? Let me ask you something, and this is a legitimate question, because this is something I have never personally understood. When did we start including sexual preferences in professional bios? When did we start including sexual orientation on resumes? When I was working a real job, I used to receive resumes all the time. Not one time did I receive a resume that said, Seymour is a heterosexual white male who is attracted to peaches and cream. 7 years as an operations manager, I never saw a resume like that. So how come we constantly see bios like this in the media? Travis is a former man who is proud to be a natural woman. Travis prefers I/me pronouns. As you guys know, ESPN has beat reporters that cover specific teams. When looking for a beat reporter, you want someone who can be objective. You're looking for someone to objectively report the news related to their specific team. For example, you would not want someone like me to be a beat reporter for the Saints. Why? Because as a lifelong fan, I can't be objective. I am emotionally invested in the team. And anytime you're emotionally invested in something, it is damn near impossible to be objective. Emotion is the number one enemy of objectivity. So someone please explain to me how Katie Barnes can be one of the lead reporters at ESPN when it comes to reporting transgender issues in sports. How can Katie Barnes possibly be objective? Well, the short answer is them can't, and Uncle KC will show you the proof. Earlier this year, Katie Barnes was invited on CNN by Jake the Bongo Tapper. Listen to how them tries to explain how biological men have no physical advantage over women. Watch for yourself.
The reality is that from a scientific perspective, we know that there are differences in sexes, and we know that the differences do tend to lead to athletic performance differences as well. However, when we look at broad-based restriction at all levels of sport, it's very challenging to say that scientifically that is supported in all cases, meaning that something that might be appropriate for swimming does not necessarily apply to basketball when it comes to individual sports versus team sports, as well as level of competition. And so the idea, I think, that transgender women have an advantage in all sports at all times, regardless of any kind of medical transition, I don't think that the scientific literature supports that at this time.
Katie Barnes is obviously emotionally invested in the issue, which is fine. That's fine. But if you're emotionally invested, it makes it damn near impossible for you to objectively cover it as a journalist, which is exactly why we saw hypocritical headlines this week when ESPN allowed Katie Barnes to cover the story about Johnny B. Biden dropping his proposed changes to Title IX. Now, from what I understand, John Biden wanted to implement federal regulations which would allow biological dudes to compete in women's sports. Since it would be regulated on a federal level, it would prevent individual states from taking action on their own. For example, if Kentucky was against biological men and women's sports, tough shit. The federal government would essentially overrule them. Fortunately, though, Johnny B. Biden, he dropped these proposed changes to Title IX, likely because there were multiple lawsuits against it. But either way, on his way out of the White House back to his Delaware dungeon, John Biden finally decided to do something to protect women. But that's not how Katie Barnes perceived it. Headline at ESPN: Biden drops plan to protect transgender athletes. How could a network that is supposedly dedicated to women be so biased against women? Let's just think about this logically for a second. Since we are debating the need to protect women or to protect transgender women, who would be more impacted by this legislation? There are 330 million people in America. Safe to assume that half of those are women. Out of 330 million, less than 1% identify as transgender. If we're looking at this logically, this should not even be an issue. Why are we having to enact federal regulations, legislation, over less than 1% of the overall population? Activists like Katie Barnes like to frame the narrative that these laws prevent transgender participation in sports, which is complete bullshit. I have yet to see legislation that bans transgender participation in sports. What these laws do ban are biological men invading women's sports. If transitioning Timmy has dreams of playing in the NBA, he is well within his rights to pursue that dream. What he can't do is pursue his dream in the WNBA. All right, before I get out of here, I wanted to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. This is going to be the last video until Thursday. To be honest with you, I will probably be on a lighter schedule for the rest of the week, maybe even the rest of the year. Most people are not watching videos on YouTube this time of year for obvious reasons. Plus, I just need a little bit of a break. Haven't had a break since last December, so the schedule probably going to be a little bit lighter the rest of the year. I wanted to take a second, though, to thank you guys for another record year here on the channel in 2024. Channel had almost 22 million views last year. I think over the lifetime of the channel, we've done 50 or maybe 55 million views, so half the views came in 2024. As always, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Feels like Christmas morning every day for me when I wake up because you guys allow me to live my dream. Sometimes this job can be difficult sometimes. When you're making 3 videos every day, it's important to stay fresh, constantly having to come up with new ideas and ways to prevent from being repetitive. But even on the hardest days, those days are a hell of a lot better than what I used to do. I had someone ask me the other day if it ever feels like a chore keeping up with the news, if it ever feels like a chore watching the NFL or the NBA or even the WNBA. Now, of course, the answer with the WNBA was yes. It's always a chore to watch pretend basketball. But with everything else, even though there are nights where I don't feel like watching the news or I don't feel like watching football or basketball, I'm never going to complain about it. I will never complain about watching television for a living. I will never complain about reading the New York Times or ESPN and being paid to do it because I used to do all these same things for free. You guys are the reason I get paid to do it. There are some of you who have been with me since the very beginning. Had someone email me the other day asking me to never remove the curtain that's on the shelf back here. You guys remember the curtains in the kitchen, how I used to broadcast from there? Channel has come a long, long way in the last 3.5 years. Hell, the channel's come a long way in the last 12 months. This time last year, I think we had 60, maybe 70,000 subscribers. Channel has doubled in size this year. But the only reason that's possible is because you guys continue to show up every day. Even the slow periods throughout the year, like right now, you guys continue to show up. And because of that, YouTube promotes the shit out of the channel during the busy times of the year. So, thank you. Thank you for your support again this year. I hope you guys have a wonderful Christmas. I will see you on Thursday.